Welcome back to ISSR in Conversation here on the ISSR YouTube channel and major podcast services. As always, I'm Anthony K. Nairn, ISSR Executive Assistant. This is part 3 of the 4-part series on ISSR's recently completed grant, generously funded by the Templeton World Charity Foundation, titled Understanding Spiritual Intelligence, or SI for short. This 4-part series, which was recorded live on Zoom between 28 June and 10 July 2023, follows in the wake of the 2023 ISSR Summer Conference on Artificial and Spiritual Intelligence. The speakers in this series, all presenters at the conference, were critical in bringing together the research and deliverables for this grant project. This 3rd part, presented live on Zoom on 5 July 2023, titled Computational Modeling of Friendship using the Affinity Program, begins with ISSR Executive Secretary Fraser providing some brief introductions, which is then followed by a detailed presentation and demo of the Affinity Program itself, followed by more details about the program. This is then followed by a discussion which includes members of the audience that were present that day. Please enjoy the 3rd episode of this special 4-part series of ISSR in Conversation on the topic of spiritual intelligence.
It's good to have you here with us. My role here is largely as a host. My name is Fraser Watts, and this session is about computational modeling of friendship, and I'm going to hand over to William Clocksin, who's going to present.
So what I wanted to do first was to show you the fun part first, which is about a simulation of, it's an agent-based simulation of entities or agents that exist in a 3-dimensional world and can move about this world and develop relationships with each other. They each have an internal disposition, and I'll show you in part what that is in a moment. And as a result of their interaction in the environment and their disposition, they can engage, they can begin in forming relationships of several different kinds. One kind is what I call friendship, which goes through a process of forming the friendship, a 4-stage process. And then they can give and receive care from each other, depending on their internal dispositions. Now, the disposition of each agent is made up from a set of values and attitudes that they have. Each agent holds, if you like, a set of basic values and attitudes. The basic values are from the Schwartz theory of basic values. The attitudes are ones that are fairly commonplace. And the other elements of the disposition of each agent are 4 values, which are analogous to, if you like, hormones in the human endocrine system. But I stress that this is not a simulation of the human endocrine system, and this is not a simulation of these hormones. I'm just using that as an analogy because the quantities of these 4 elements, if you like, vary up and down depending on what happens to the agent in the environment, and it also affects its future behavior, what happens. So let me just start this. And so the initial configuration is what you can see here. There's a box, 3-dimensional box, and inside this box, I think there are 30 or 40 in there, agents which have been initialized to just some random position and velocity in space. They each have a color, as you can see, and that is a social object. The color, they have a favorite color, which is something that helps them to find a friend, because friends have favorite colors, and they can use this to seek out and form friendships with others based on their favorite color. but I've augmented the idea of a social object a bit more so that each social object has two aspects. One is, for example, my own favorite color, the agent's own favorite color. And the other aspect is favorite colors that that agent is willing to accept as, you know, friend-worthy. And so it doesn't mean that that agents have to have full agreement on social objects, which is the standard idea of friendship, you know, full agreement in all things. I think the real case is, or a better case to simulate is one where there are these two aspects of every social object. So, for example, this social object here is kind of a greenish color, and I haven't looked inside it yet, but it might say that it is happier to have friends who have entirely different favorite colors. Okay, so that's just one thing before we start. So each agent is a sphere. It's got a little stalk on it, and it can raise a flag on that stalk depending on its current state in order to communicate with other agents. And it can also send messages to other agents if they're close enough. And the messages are like, will you be my friend? And there can be messages in reply like yes or no. And we'll see how all this happens in a few moments, okay? So here's the control panel here. There's a button, press start, and I will press this. Now, as soon as I press this, the simulation will begin. There's gravity in this world, so the agents will tend to fall down and bounce around. And in doing so, they will start seeking out other agents who could be their friends. Now, whether they develop a friendship will depend on their disposition. There's a number of basic values that need to be used. So, for example, benevolence means that high value of benevolence means that they are more friendly, they'll offer support to their in-group. Degrees of universalism means that they'll offer support to their out-group. They don't have in-groups and out-groups yet. That is established when they establish friendships. So their friends are their in-group and their non-friends are their out-group. So I'll just start this up and we can see how it goes, and I'll explain things as it goes. I can pause it from time to time, which I think I'll probably do, okay? So let's start that. Can everybody see that they're moving about on the screen? Oh, already one friendship has started. Now, in some cases, you can see a link. Ooh, gosh, here's something. I'm going to just pause it right here. Okay, now you can see in some cases, I've just paused it so you can have a look. So if we look over here to the right, we have 3 agents who have developed a link between some of them. And so that link denotes that they've established a friendship. So each tick of the clock, by the way, is a 1/10 of a second, 100 milliseconds. And so developing a friendship can take place as quickly as half a second, because each tick advances each narrative that I'll get to that in a minute, but the internal narratives that each agent is willing to have. So now you can also see that quite a lot of them are wearing a purple a cubicle purple hat. And what this hat means is that they need help. Okay, now, so it's quite quickly that they need help. Now, if you look at this control screen here, we see here these graphs, these plots. These are reward, stress, attach, and energy are the 4 what I call elements of the internal economy. And what each agent has values for those 4 things, okay? But what I show here is the sum total. Okay, so this is the total over the whole population of these elements: reward, stress, attachment, energy, averaged over the whole population. Okay, so at the beginning of the simulation, where time is 0, this left-hand edge here, if you can see it, the red one, energy, starts at the initial random values, but it drops very quickly. And that's because it's nighttime when the simulation starts. And so the sun hasn't had a chance to recharge their energy, but also they haven't had enough interactions to be energetic. If they have a certain disposition and have a high degree of certain basic values, then contact with other entities not only increases their attach, which is like oxytocin, but it also increases their energy. But in other ones, if they have a different disposition, closeness might decrease their energy a little bit. So we can also see that stress starts out, goes to a peak as few friendships are made, because stress is increased if you don't have any friends. But as friendships are done, the stress goes down. Reward tracks that a little bit, which is odd, because you might think that as more friendships are formed, there's higher reward. Actually, reward is more to do with caregiving and receiving rather than friendship. So the contact that's the proximal contact that's essential for building friendship is shown in attach here. Okay, so these are related. You can think of these as analogies to the 4 of the 50-odd hormones. This upper plot here shows the number of friendships, the number of pairwise friendships overall. So it's steadily increasing. In fact, there are 34 of these links somewhere. Doesn't look like there are that many. Oh, but each link is bidirectional, so that's double the number of links you see. Population is 41 friends. So there are 20, at the moment, there are 27 groups, individual groups, of which 24 of those groups are just people on their, agents on their own, so like this one. So you can also see, before I move on, that one of the agents has become a caregiver. Oh, 2 of them have become caregivers. There's this one here, this green one, and this green one here. Now you can tell that they've become caregivers because they display a little hat, which has a red cross on it, the international sign of caregiving. And so so any agent may give care or receive care, and it depends on their internal disposition. If they have a lot of benevolence, they will give care to their in-group. If they have a lot of universalism, they'll give care also to members of their out-group. But they also need to have certain other attitudes in order to give care, and they need enough energy to be able to give care. Okay, and right, and as care is given, they are rewarded a little bit. The one they're giving care to receives more energy and reduces stress. So there are little micro interactions going on to affect these parameters of the economy. But overall, this is what the sum of the economy looks like. Okay, so let's resume this. There are all sorts of things going on here. More caregivers have decided that they have the right disposition to give care, and so they'll do so. There are various messages that I can print out. Right. These are messages. I'll just stop it, pause it when the next one comes on. Okay, so Agent 26 has given a no to Agent 23's message to be my friend. When an agent attempts to form a friendship, the other agent can say yes or no, and this again depends on the disposition and attitudes. They have to be reasonably compatible. They have to have certain basic values that are shared and attitudes that are conducive to friendship. Notice I'm not going into more technical detail about this, because I could tell you exactly what values and which of the basic values are, but I won't do that for the moment. I'll just say that it depends on the disposition. So A38 is now asked, will you be my friend, to agent 26. Okay, now there's another thing we can do. Toggle trace. Okay, I'll do that anyway. When we carry on, and that is that I will select an agent, say that one, and I'll just move this here. Now what this is a mimic diagram. This first window up at the top shows the main basic values in its value set. So it's got favorite colors, it's got a certain amount of benevolence, universalism, self-direction, stimulation, security, and it's got an attitude of forgiving. This is not a very forgiving element. It's only got values around 0.2. It's also got something here in which it has completed a give care mission to A14, because A14 is now has enough energy, so it's completed that mission. So these tracks down here, think of these as like a mimic diagram for a railway. Each of these tracks is a narrative. That is, it's a information bearing sequence of states that each agent can go through for various reasons. This has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 narratives that control essentially the operation of each agent. And I've selected A25, that one. Now, notice it's got this A14. A14 is refused, that's what ref means. But A25 is also giving care to A14 as well. So even though A14 refused it as a friend, it's willing to accept care from A25. And that, again, just depends on the exact values of the disposition. So you can see motility, maintain friendship, request friend, is waiting for something to happen. Giving care is both to friends and others is very busy at the moment. So that's mainly what this agent is doing. Okay, now this population has achieved one of the possible kind of points at which the simulation tends to end. And that is, there's a kind of point at which everybody decides they either want to be a friend of someone in this big group, or they already are a friend of someone in that big group. So I'm just trying to get the lighting on it right. And then there are a number of singletons. Now, these are people who, for one reason or another, cannot form friendships. Let's look at this one. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't have any friends, doesn't even have any refusals. What about this one? Oh, yes. Okay. A15 is quite interesting because, as you can see, it has 1, 2, 3, 4 ex-friends. Okay. Now, friendships can end or be dissolved. They end for various reasons. And one of the reasons is that the other friend, although initially able to form a friendship, decides to stray so far away or is absent so much of the time, that is, it's not within a certain proximity. Because I use physical space here as a proxy for the closeness of the relationship. And it strayed so far away that the decision is made to end that friendship. It also depends exactly how far away that is, depends on the disposition as well, and how they're feeling at the time because of these things. So yeah, it's got 4 ex-friends, and it can't seem to find any other friend. Now, one of the things about doing computational modeling is that you're trying to work out what are the things that need to be known about in a system like this. So hopefully it can inform the design of other cognitive systems. And in doing this, we've come to the conclusion that one of the things you need to know about is who your friends were. And the reason is because you might, there's an opportunity to refriend them. And under the right disposition, that refriending can happen if they have enough of this forgiveness. So this agent here is quite forgiving, 0.6 on the degree, 0.42 on degrees, so that's actually not so high. But, and in order to recognize if someone has been a friend before, you need to remember that. So that's why we have a list. Here are all the ex-friends. Another possibility is that they've been rejected or refused. This hasn't had any friends who hasn't found people who will refuse it. But if they did, then ref would be on that list. There's a huge swarm here. Let me just stop it because this is not very entertaining. And I'll just restart it again so you can see what it looks like from the beginning. So as you can see, these values overall have kind of settled down. Let's just start this up again. Right, I need to move these into the shared screen. So we're starting again from different random values of position, velocity, and disposition as well. So let's start that. Well, here's the sun going along, right? Okay. Let's just have a look at this one. Okay, it's got some refusals. Good. So now A28, as you can see, has got 3 friends on this list. 2 of them say 100%. That means that for the lifetime of that friendship, these friends have been 100% very close to A28. Okay, so they're, if you like, good friends, very good friends. But also A2 has refused a friend request, but A28 has remembered this. This is all the information about A28. Has remembered this so that in future, if it doesn't have to keep asking A2, would you like to be a friend? Would you like to be a friend? Because it knows that once it's refused, it's going to refuse unless its disposition changes. So from time to time, it might ask to refriend if A28's disposition has changed in that meantime. It doesn't know about A2's disposition because agents don't know what's inside other agents. They only know what favorite color. They only know 2 things about other agents: what their favorite color is, given by the display, and also what I call the importance attribution of the attribute of their basic value. Okay, so at this point, I'll say a little bit more about how the disposition is formed. Okay, we've got lots of caregiving going on at the moment, as you can see from all those red crosses. So every social object, basic value, and attitude in the disposition has 3 parameters called importance, degree, and intensity. The importance is a value that the agent itself reports as meaning that that value is important to them, okay, as part of its identity, that it shows to other agents. Now that's what agents can transmit to other agents, okay? So it says, for example, an agent might say, I mean, not one of these, but in another type of simulation, agent might say, I set great store by law and order, okay? So that's the so-called importance. It's a high importance. They will report to others. However, the 2 other parameters are important too in deciding what actually happens. The second one is called degree. That's the amount that agent will use that value in making its decisions. So suppose an agent says, I attribute great importance to law and order, and I say so. I report this to other agents, and yet they have a low degree of the same value. That means that they'll cheat when it suits them. Okay, so they may say they will report that they have that this value means a lot to them, but in reality they will make decisions maybe otherwise. If they have a high degree of that as well, then they will be consistent with what they say. But this leaves open the possibility of simulating systems where the agents are not consistent like that. And then the third one is the intensity. And intensity is how much motive force the agent will apply when making actions that depend on that basic value. Okay, so those are the three. The importance, which is what the agent will say, how important that value is to them. The degree, which is how they actually act in relation to that value. And the intensity, the relation, which is how they decide relative to that value. And the third one is intensity, which is how much motive force they exercise in according to that value. Okay, so if you have a lot of motive force, they'll move fast, for example, in this. So here again, we've got up to tick number 2,840 something, 50 something, which means this simulation has been going for 290 seconds. And it's again formed into a huge globule here, who are either agents who are already friends with each other given by this link, or agents who are trying to pursue friendships within here. And then there are some singletons which seem to be offering care to one another, but are kind of on their own. Oh, there's a pair of agents. Okay, right. Quite a few of the simulations end like this. Right, we were looking at A28, who had 3 friends. One of them has now refused them after a while. I'm not quite sure. Oh, it wasn't A28. Let's just click on somebody else. Okay, here's A14, who has had 1 refusal and has 2 ex-friends. So that's why they're on their own. So yeah, there are various aspects of, if you like, friendship and care dynamics that are illustrated in all this. Okay, so the narrative for requesting a friendship goes like this. First, you wait until there's a proximal friend. If from what you can tell, not only is your disposition toward making a friend of them, but from what you can see of theirs, it looks likely, then you ask if they'll be a friend. Then you wait for the message to come back for them. That could take a long time. Here, this person is waiting for a message that other person might not be able to give. If it's Y, then you've gained a friend. If it's no, then you've had a refusal. These will cause certain flags and other things to be set inside that agent. And for example, X or ref to be put on the list, etc. And then you make the friend and loop around to try again. Okay. So the mobility that they have depends on what they can see at some distance. Okay, so there are, as a result of all this, there are proximities, closenesses of friendship that have emerged from this, and which are not coded in hard and fast, a bit like Dunbar's levels. I've not coded that in at all. but they can see these agents can see a certain distance. There's distances that thresholds that determine whether they are local or not, whether they're continuing the friendship or not. And as a result, these levels, if you like, of closeness emerge from the simulation. Why do this at all? And it's because we want to try to model how social relationships develop through interaction. And we are not interested in simulating human relationships. This is not a simulation of human. It's but rather to develop a model which could be used to characterize general relationships between any agents, in this case, artificial agents. But in the future, this might inform how one would develop cognitive systems for androids, which have to be in society and relate in a sensible way. I'm also interested in how computational and how entities reason about social concerns. That's, I haven't seen much research on that. So currently, yes, I've got friendship, caregiving and receiving, implementing leader and follower at the moment. And in the future, I would like to be able to have other types of relationships, like based on origin concerns, for example. Here are the other attitudes I have: credulous and skeptical, as well as forgiving.
So is the purpose of this to help us to understand relationships better, or is it, as you see it, a response to general issues about what AI has achieved and not achieved?
I think both of those. I think AI is not looking at this type of activity at the moment. It never has. It's never really been interested in what's motivated me, which is about how intelligence is actually not based on problem solving, but based on how we construct intelligence in our relations with others. So what I'm not trying to change AI, but I hope that I'm looking in a different direction than what mainstream AI has. And I hope there might be something to offer. So just to point out that what Leon and I were talking about before, here's one that ended up with like 2 clumps, a triplet, I think there are 3 there, quartet, and one on its own. This was typical of what happened in this simulation before I recently changed the disposition. Okay, so quite a few ways I can go on from this. One is I would like to be able to have systems that learn. For example, populations can be successful or not successful. And so I would like to see what basic values were generated by that particular run of the simulation in order for the population to be successful or not. And I suspect that basic values will cluster around various areas. So, for example, if there's a lot of benevolence in the population, they'll make friends, and there'll be more energy, and fewer will die, and etc. I had death, by the way. I had death and mourning previously. If they ran out of energy for more than a particular amount of time, they would die. Their friends would mourn, which increases their stress and lowers their affect. But I've taken that out because populations were dying too readily, and I needed to learn from this. Yeah, one could conjecture that populations that learn to survive will adapt by becoming more benevolent in caregiving. That might be a trivial conjecture to make, but I've also used matrix factorization, which I won't report here, to look at latent states of successful and unsuccessful groups, and it bears out some of this. I'm really a big fan of non-negative matrix factorization, but I won't inflict that on you today. So what I'd like to do is to implement more of the concerns, not only with having social objects, basic values and attitudes, but also norms and traits. I can have more topics for social objects, and I will implement those along with leader follower, because there will be several issues that leaders can lead on and followers can follow on. And so an issue is a type of social object. I'll re-implement death and loss. I'll do the learning bits. I'd like to have a greater range of possible relationships in here, but I think I've kind of shown enough with friendship and caregiving receiving. And there are also some interesting narratives about opinion forming, belief, and influencing, which I'll implement once I've got leader-follower relationships implemented. So a lot of this is going to take place after the end of the project, which essentially has come to an end. But I'm interested in doing this further work anyway.
Amongst the range of friendships, if I can ask another question, I know you've given some thought to spiritual friendship, and I wonder if you can give a brief indication of how you might characterize that particular kind of relationship in the terms of this model.
Right. Spiritual friendships are characterized by more than just mere affinity regarding a social object. They have to do with a deep connection with either an other agent or with a social object, and a deep connection which is actually not easy to describe using the vocabulary we have here. However, I would guess that spiritual relationships are characterized by having a particularly high degree of benevolence and a very high degree of security seeking. Now, because these are randomly distributed amongst the population, I could maybe find some of these agents that might be more susceptible to spiritual relationships than others. But I would have to better characterize what the values and attitudes are that are sought when spiritual relationships are formed. And so that's actually the reason why I'm interested in spiritual relationships, because there should be some set of attitudes and values that are of particularly high degree in those who seek spiritual relationships, as opposed, or I mean, by contrast to relationships based on mere affinity with social objects. Okay, at this point, before I go into any kind of presentation, can I just pause and ask if there are any questions about anything so far?
Could you say another word about intensity? That was less clear to me.
Right.
What do you mean by motive force? What difference does the motive force make?
Right. Okay. The difference in this simulation of motive force has to do with how much speed or energy they will apply to whatever decision they make. Okay. So, for example, some agents will move faster than others. They have a higher degree of motive force. So they will have decided, for example, I'll just pause it right here. They'll have decided to form a friendship, and then, so they want to be closer to the object of friendship, and those with a higher intensity of benevolence, and it also applies to attitudes as well as basic values. The ones with higher intensity will go faster towards that goal.
No. Is the intensity a function of each value or attitude, or a function of the person in general?
No, it's so each agent has got a set of its own basic values, and each of the degree, intensity, and importance is attached to each individual basic value. So there could be different ones.
Yeah,
So you could have
got
a
it.
high degree of intensity for, let's just start it here so I can get a, yeah. So for example, pause. So benevolent, A33, let's look at its benevolence. So the first one is its degree, and degree is a random variant drawn from the normal distribution with mean 0.8, which means it's quite high, and standard deviation 0.2. Here's its, so it has quite a high degree of reporting benevolence to others. However, it's got a fairly low degree of benevolence. That's the second one here, 0.2. And it's got an even lower degree, amount of intensity, 0.01. So it's lazy. It says it's benevolent. In fact, it doesn't make decisions to that effect, and it's lazy. It doesn't, okay, so those are the ways. And now if you take another one, stimulation, it reports high stimulation, 0.72, even a higher degree of stimulation, so it'll act on the basis of stimulation, and it's above average on intensity as well. So for any of the actions here which depend on stimulation, and I apologize, I can't remember exactly which ones they are, but there are some inside here, and I can search through the program to find out where stimulation matters. This is quite a stimulated or stimulated. This one seeks stimulating experiences, of which friendship would be one, but it doesn't end up making the friendship because it doesn't show enough benevolence, and certainly won't offer care to friends on the basis of this. Universalism reports very high. The degree is about average, and the intensity is about average. So this would be more inclined to offer care to a member of its outgroup. And since it doesn't look like it's going to get any friends, that'll be, that will happen. So every agent is initialized to different random values of all these. Here's the forgiving attitude. Now, forgiving determines how willing an agent is to refriend a previous ex-friend or someone who's refused them. Now that has to be used carefully, because otherwise the agent, if it's extremely forgiving, will insist to other agents that they can refriend, and that other agents may continue to refuse them, and that will drive down some of the other aspects of this distribution. So it has a kind of a self-limiting, sort of self-regulating effect, which I haven't comprehensively bottomed out yet, but it seems to work.
It does seem, well, the simulations that you've run so far actually do seem quite different to the ones that we saw in Swindon. There seems to be much more bunching together. So I'm one of two questions. One is, can you just say very briefly, might not be interesting to everybody, but what you've changed between Swindon and now? What's the difference between the two?
Yeah,
sorry, if you could answer that one first, that'd be great.
So I've added stimulation and security in, more of the Schwartz basic values, which determine more things that determine decisions that are made during the request friend narrative here.
Okay.
And so yeah, the thing that's different, I'll just say to others, the thing I've noticed as well, which is different from the previous version, is that previously the simulation tended to become stable, having 2 or 3 large groups, a smaller number of, a number of other like couples or triplets, and then a fairly small number of singles. But here we seem to have one huge group and others trying to get into that group, which we didn't have last time. Okay, so I think that has to do with the new basic values, that they're more, it's possibly something to do with stimulation. They're seeking security and stimulation by being close to that big group. Now, I didn't program that in. That's behavior that's emerged from having these basic values. But I think that may be what's happening, which wasn't happening before.
No, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. That there's some attitudes and values that might lead to, might be more concerned with sort of overall group harmony than individual relationship.
Indeed.
So that's really interesting. Yeah.
And I think that's the importance of not only using the basic value system, but also in augmenting it with these 3 extra parameters.
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to respond to Leon's comment. It seems to me, yes, that everything was clumping together, and I was wondering if it's maybe the forgiving program that you've added, because everyone's now, no one's holding a grudge anymore. No one is, and on top of that, you've made security very important. So they want to be secure, they don't want a lot of change, and they're willing to forgive everybody for everything. So I would recommend toning down your forgiveness, because I don't think in real life we all end up in the same group.
No, okay, let me just correct in the kindest way I possibly can a serious misunderstanding.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, these ideas of the forgiving, the attitudes, and the basic values, they're different for every agent.
Right.
So some agents have a lot of forgiveness, other agents don't have very much at all. And they're all randomly dispensed to them when at initialization time. But it is the case, however, that there's something in what you say that because I've changed the program to give more attention to security, that they're using security, even though they all have different values of it, different quantities of it along those 3 dimensions. That could be a more important factor in the friendship. So forgiveness I've had from the start, so that hasn't changed at all. That's been in there for the past couple of years.
Another question. So are these, I'm not really 100% sure about this, but I don't know that all these values are evenly distributed normally in the population. So for example, security, it may not be normally distributed. So how did you
absolutely
determine?
Right. So when I dispense, if you like, these values in my godlike way at the beginning of the simulation, I use a uniform distribution. So they could be anywhere along the spectrum. What I have is the normal distributions here. That's for values that are measured for each individual agent. So this is an attempt to bring a little bit of stochasticity into the simulation. So when I need to know how much benevolence, how much degree of benevolence does this agent have, when that's in the program, it's not looking at a single number like 0.2. It's saying, I'm going to draw a new random variate from this distribution, which is centered on 0.2, but has a standard deviation of 0.1. And that means that it's a little different every time, okay? Just enough to give a bit of stochasticity in, and I think that's more realistic, frankly.
Yeah.
So the normal so it's not normally distributed in the population, it's uniformly distributed, okay? And how accurate that is to human populations, I just don't know. But when the program needs to choose a value to use in its computations, it generates a random variate from here instead of using, excuse me, a number that's just been generated at the beginning. I think there are lots of good reasons to do that, but it's hard to describe what they are unless you do a lot in neural nets where they have fixed parameters. I don't think that's a good idea.
Mhm.
This helps it also to get out of local minima, because it jump out. So yeah, I think there's lots of good reasons for doing it this way, but that has to do with how it measures its own values, and the same for the internal economy. So the reward, stress, attach, and energy, those are random variates, and not actual specific values of stress. It's saying this. So this is the overall. Okay, this is overall reward, stress, attach, and energy. But each individual has rewards. Oh, and here they are. So this has got 0 energy, so it needs help. That's why it's got the purple hat there. It's got a lot of attachment. So it's been rewarded through frequent recent contact, that is close contact. It's got a lot of reward, and it's got not very much stress. Those are these 4 here. So but these have been picked from a random variate describing its current state.
William, sorry, can I ask another really basic question? As well as the quantifiable variables, as well as the attitudes and what have you, is there any attempt to model time? The amount of time they each spend doing different things, the amount of time they each have available for relationships, the amount of time forgiving takes versus the amount of time giving care takes, or something like that, or is it is it just the underlying variable that's making the difference?
Yeah. Okay. I can say yes and no to that. So the no is because the only sense it has of time is its progress through these narratives. Okay. And in the simulation, it does one step of every narrative for every agent at the same time for each clock tick. And so it's synchronous. Sorry, not synchronous. What's the word I'm using? Concurrent. However, there is an element of time involved with this, and this is what is represented here with what I call termness. This is the length of the term of a relationship. Now here it's overall, but individuals have, in particular if they have friends, will make a record of how long those have been good friends, that is proximal friends. And although that isn't in terms of time, it uses time. So what I've done here is click on an agent just to show agent 17 has 2 friends. They're both good friends because they've been friends for 100% of the time that they've been friends. Okay, they've been close enough to be good friends for 100% of the time. So this is quite lucky, and so I think there's elements of attraction. So here's one, A38 down here somewhere, has got 2 friends for whom they've been close friends 100% of the time. But here, A16 has only been a close friend for 91% of the time. Now, once this goes down to below 50%, we're looking at dissolving that friendship. And that, again, depends on the disposition. If they're more forgiving, then it takes a bit longer to dissolve the friendship. If they have a lot of self-direction, then they're more inclined to benefit themselves and others. And so they will say, I'm getting away from this friendship.
No.
Yeah, okay. How should I interpret that?
No, power would have done that. Self-direction,
power, yeah.
not getting away from others. Just, you might go quickly because you're no longer interested in this. You're looking for something else, and this group isn't going your way. So
Yeah.
I'll go my own way.
Yeah, that's right. It's self-direction. It's about going your own way, and that is used in several places in the program. I take the point you said about power, and I will put that in, because I was in the latest version, which I'm not demonstrating today. I've got leader and follower, and they each look at power in a different way, and that's a kind of relationship. And so I've implemented power for that, but I can happily apply power also to this idea that if you have a high degree of power, particularly towards your friends, then you're more likely to make decisions which favor your own situation.
Niels wants to come in.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also your response to Fraser, William, you said that that you would think that something like a deep connection is very important, so, and benevolence, of course. But what about universalism?
Because, sorry, yes.
One would think that
it's universal. Sorry, I meant to say universalism. Yeah, yeah, that's right. It's a high degree of universalism.
Thank you.
And yeah, I think that's the predictor. Universalism, and what was the other one I mentioned? Security. I mean, there's been some writing by anthropologists on correlations between those who develop spiritual friendships or have a religious inclination, and their need for connection. And I think, you know, there's something in that.
Thanks. So Catherine next.
Yeah, if may I add to
Yes,
what you just were talking about?
please, and then Catherine. Shalom. Yes.
Yeah, certainly universalism, as you said, but a general comment, you're focusing on the highs, and I think it's important to focus on the lows.
Yeah.
That is what's got to be missing in that relationship. People who are high in power and in achievement are probably not going to seek out and develop spiritual relationships. And the negatives, if you will, are at least as important. Well, I don't know if at least, but are very important, and not just the positive if you're going to simulate accurately.
Yeah, absolutely right. I do take the lows into account, but for the purposes of this presentation, I've focused mainly on where things where you need a lot of it, rather than where it's important that the value is low. So
I emphasize this because I think the problem with the early value behavior work was that they ignored the negative. And if you don't have the negative in there, you don't predict behavior very well. And similarly, here, I think you need the negatives as well. You've not taken tradition in at all. At some point, you might want to, especially for spiritual, because tradition has to do with reaching out with something far beyond you. And that's quite central to much spiritual.
yeah, I totally agree. That's definitely, of course. So I've looked at some of the values, and it's as though they can be correlated, but also anti-correlated at the same time. So some people prize tradition in their religiosity, and some people reject tradition in their religiosity.
Yeah.
So it's not clear how tradition should be used.
So actually, that leads right into my suggestion, is that it might depend on the agent's perception of what that other entity is. So if you were going to model God, for example, then it would depend on your particular view of God or the agent's view of God, which might be very, very different. And so it'd be very interesting to follow along. If you get to the point where you're actually doing the modeling of spiritual relationships, I would love to be a part of that.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to have you as a part of that. Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear more from Leon. I mean, William, you said this is a model of relationality between agents of various kinds. Leon's done a lot of work on relationality. I think you see some kinds of relationality as distinctively human, rather than between any kinds of agents. Are there any comments you want to make in that kind of area?
So yeah, before I say anything else, I suppose what I really want to ask William, I didn't want to ask it before now, is it's kind of a big one, which is we're talking about relationships and the importance of relationality and thinking about people and agents in relational terms. And this is essentially because we don't think it's been done well before now. We think that AI is as we currently understand it, excuse me, is
neglected that whole area.
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to be completely clear on whether you think that the friendship modeling that you're doing is modeling a way that relationships might form if we continue to see people in the way that the current developers of AI see them, or whether this is leading to a sort of slightly different way of thinking about minds and intelligence altogether. So at the bottom of the question, I suppose, is, do you think that what you're doing is contributing to a different concept of intelligence, to a different concept of persons ultimately, or whether what you're doing could really be modeled in quite traditional cognitivist terms ultimately, whether the kinds of, well, whether the way that you conceptualize the agents that are doing the interactions aren't actually relational in a very sort of fundamental sense at all, but are rather sort of individual entities with fixed values sort of crashing into each other, which is a kind of relationship, but not necessarily the kind of relationality that not necessarily the way that I'm thinking about relationality and the relationality of cognition and the relationality of personhood. So if you could say a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, in a very basic sense, they are entities that are just crashing into each other, but their dispositions change over time as a result of these actions. And so I think it's more than just with fixed patterns that determine a kind of a fixed behavior. But at the end of the day, it's just a simulation. It's just a model. And it's not attentive enough to, say, results in anthropology or whatever, in order to be a model of human relationships. It's a model of, if you like, abstract things that have been facts from everyday life and anthropology, psychology, sociology that have informed the model. It's not a model of them. It's just that the model has been informed by various results. And so it's, you know, you won't look to this model for any kind of veridical statement about human life and endeavor. It's, you know, I love programming, and it's mainly about, you know.
But does it say anything deep about what intelligence is?
I'm not sure what I could say that says anything deep about what intelligence is. Yeah, I think those are big questions.
Yeah. So so the way that I've been thinking about relational personhood is the inseparability of conceptualizing persons from their relationships, the impossibility of understanding individuals in isolation from their environments, whether they're physical, cultural, or social. And
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yes, so we totally agree on the paucity of understanding intelligence in terms of problem solving. These are not irrelevant to human life. We do solve problems. We do solve the kinds of problems that don't seem to require very deep relationality all the time. These are mathematical problems, language problems, logical problems, all the sorts of problems that that we solve when we're doing IQ tests, for example. But actually, there are very many relational problems, essentially things that we do in everyday life that we can only understand in terms of relations. And actually, we think about relations and relational intelligence in various different ways. So, although I think that there is one kind of problem solving that is purely internal, even if we stick with a sort of broadly problem solving notion of intelligence, then we can still make a very strong case for relational intelligence. And that is evident in all kinds of really interesting studies, particularly in the field of embodied cognition, actually, where a lot of work has been done on understanding the way that we are embedded and enacted and extended in our environments. And I think that is the most profound sense of relationality that I've come across in relation to intelligence. Again, it works in all kinds of different ways. There's a very fundamental relationality in perception, for example, in Gibsonian ideas of perception, all sorts of wonderful studies about how people depend on interactions with their environments. Bartenders relying on glasses and mixers and things to help them remember the drinks order that that people have placed with them. Studies of people assessing how steep hills are, depending on making different assessments of how steep hills are depending on how much weight they're carrying. All these things that seem to entail or require a bodily interaction with the world, so that the actual processing itself doesn't seem to be taking place purely internally. It's not just going on inside people's heads, but actually the thinking is being done in interaction with the environment, in relation with the environment. But there's also the interpersonal cognition, the way that we come to understand ourselves by simulating the emotional states of others. Studies of mirror neurons and the work of Thomas Fuchs and Maltzoff and a number of other really interesting people in this kind of field, who Evan Thompson, another good one on empathy, who suggests that we really cannot possibly understand ourselves without representing others. And this means that the understanding of self and others is a wholly relational process, that it's not that we are it's not we're just bouncing off people, but actually our relationships are central parts of our intelligence, central parts of our cognition. And that extends into culture as well. There's a number of very interesting studies on how embodiedness in culture leads us to think about being in a relational sense. Things about some work by Lung and Cohen, I think it was, on bodily comportment that we take from tradition and how that affects our cognition on a daily basis, again suggesting that these things actually constitute cognition. They're not just what happens when people bounce into each other, but we can't think about ourselves, our ways of thinking about the world in isolation from those relationships. And then one final one, the sort of very sort of radical understanding of the extended mind, where we use notebooks and calculators as if they are actually parts of our brains, as if they again, the cognition is being done externally, it's being done in the extended world. But in an interpersonal sense, John Teskey gives a lovely example of how we might offload cognition onto significant others. So he gives the example of relying on his wife for directions, I think, but there's all kinds of other ways of thinking about that. But ultimately, he's saying, well, in this particular context, then my wife's cognition deserves to be considered as part of my cognition. The cognitive action itself can't be understood in isolation from that relationship, from that very close relationship in that case. And in all those senses, cognition and intelligence are constituted by relationships. They're not just they're not just the result of things crashing into each other. It's not just perception and then reaction. And I think that's it's a very deep sense of relationality. And I mean, I have no doubt at all that all of those processes I've described could be modeled computationally. But they would be, I mean, I wonder whether it would look quite different to the kind of simulation that that you're able to do in the kinds of terms that you've been running your own simulations on. Does that make sense?
Yes, it all makes sense. I would need to work out how to make a start on that, which, I'm certainly not against doing. I think about these things along the same lines you do. I think in terms of the theory, it's very consistent with. There is a limit to how one can represent things. So, for example, these spheres are the body. The links between them are the interaction. Of the connection, and there's a quality to that connection which is represented by all the different details that I showed you, like whether they are ex-friends or that sort of thing. But there's I don't think there's a limit to that, but I think this has only made a start compared to the overarching theory that you've outlined just now.
Yes, no, and I appreciate that that the entities in your simulation are embodied, and actually the embodiment is very important to that. And I certainly don't see anything in the simulation that suggests that we don't need to think about intelligence in relational terms. It's more a question of whether we can run simulations like that whilst still believing that intelligence isn't actually relational, whether whether it can all be done in traditional cognitivist terms, or whether we need whether we really need to think about relationality and intelligence in a different way to move us forward.
Yeah, I'm all for doing that. The question is what direction that is.
Thanks very much. I wonder, Shalom, if there's more you'd like to say. I mean, as William says, he's made some use of your theory, and you've made some comments, for example, about the importance of the lows as well as the highs, but you may have other things you'd like to feed in, and it'd be good to hear them if you have.
Sure. I would expand a bit on what Leon has said brilliantly, I think. I'm very struck by what you said. But I want to say a couple of simpler things first. First, you've talked about in entering into your modeling possibly traits and norms. And I would just say that what you're calling attitudes, since they are relatively stable, sound very much like traits already to me. Forgivingness is a trait for some people. And if you're going to go in the direction of taking on the major traits in the big five theory in psychology, then you're really talking about stable attitudes. And I don't know that that's such a big jump for what you're already doing. Norms, on the other hand, brings us a bit toward what Leon was talking about. But before I get to that, the distribution of value importance, at least in the general population, we know quite a lot about that. And you could more accurately perhaps use the distributions we know about in setting your initial values. That's a quick one. But for example, benevolence, at least when it comes to say, and when it comes to importance, is far and away, along with universalism, way up there, and self-direction is close to them, and power is at the very bottom, and stimulation is very low.
Before you, can I just say that, yes, it's absolutely right. I just made them all uniform at the start just for the sake of convenience. But what I'd really like to do is to specify how the values are distributed at the beginning, to do what if experiments. What if everybody, well, half the population is a certain way, the other half are another way? What if there are only one or two good people, if you like,
Right.
in the population? And so I've left open the possibility, not necessarily to use empirically derived distributions as you've done, but to be able to specify them, to do what if experiments.
Yeah. Your distinction and building in the difference between importance and degree is tremendously important, of course. And it's almost, well, importance is what you're communicating to the other, and say is what you're really doing. And for some people, those are very similar, and for some, those are very different. So that's an extremely useful distinction. Now to get to the situational or interactive or relational aspects, which to me, I guess I'm a social psychologist, and all of this cognitive stuff going on leaves me feeling that a big chunk of reality is left out here, and the simulation won't be very much like what the world is, and even including norms, which is a way to talk about the perceived norms, is a way to talk about the impact of situation and how people perceive the pressures on them. And that's very useful. And perhaps that's where you'll begin to overcome the lack of, I almost used the nasty word failure, to take into account the reality in which interrelationships, in which relational things take place. The fact that you've allowed, even within each person, a degree of freedom that at any given moment they can go up and down a little bit is very good, because I think that our values and our attitudes and our traits are called out more or less according to the nature of the situation. And your the standard deviation you're using might want to be even a little bit larger than what you're using. I think there's more variation within person than that. And somehow, if you could do something to model different kinds of situations, it would help a great deal. The way values operate, the way traits operate, is not randomly distributed across situations, because situations across people pull out certain values more. If you're in the army, certain things become power, conformity become very important. If you're in graduate school, self-direction becomes more important. And I miss that in what you're doing, though I realize you can't do everything at one time. Those are the main comments I'd like to make.
Okay, can I just briefly reply, because I find this really interesting. The reason I wanted to look at norms is because I'm interested in norms and violation of norms, because there are certain patterns of values for which an agent might be inclined to violate some norms, in which case we have things like guilt, remorse, reconciliation, punishment, revenge. All those things start coming in. And I think that would be quite interesting. But I think that starts with norms and the violation of norms. But standard deviation could be larger individually. Yeah, I totally agree. For testing it initially, I wanted the standard deviation fairly low so that at least some of the behavior would be a bit more predictable. But yeah, I like the idea that, and I also like the idea of how the context determines how values are used, or which values become, say, upregulated or downregulated, depending on context. And yes, certainly in some militaries, tradition is very upregulated. For example, yeah, particularly in the British Army, it has a regimental system which places great store by tradition. Other armies don't necessarily have that, but yeah, interesting.
Just on the subject of what we might call individual differences, William. One of the things that I do really like about the simulation is that whatever differences are programmed into people individually, into entities or agents individually, the differences also evolve over time, don't they, as a result of a history of interaction, which is a very important way of introducing difference. And it strikes me, I mean, when I talk about, you know, being able to model it all in traditional cognitive terms, in terms of you know, predispositions and existing factors and things like that, there is always a tension between you know, being representative of a particular sort of agent and being an individual, being a particular. And obviously, it's a very important point theologically. But one of the things that the focus on relationality does is expose this important tension between individuality and representativeness. And I mean, I just wonder whether it's possible to model it at all. I mean, to treat every single agent as if it were completely individual all the time. I mean, I mean, are there limits to what computers can do? Really, I mean, I know you're of the opinion that the failures of AI so far are not necessarily hardware problems, but software and conceptual problems, programming problems. But I mean, are there just some things that you couldn't possibly hope to do with a simulation like this, and accounting for individuals as individuals, as opposed to just sort of representatives of the larger, wider species? Seems like it'll always be a limitation of this sort of approach.
Yeah, I kind of think I'm representing individuation in terms of how each agent can have completely different values or parameters for its values and economy, internal economy. But I take the point that yeah, I would like to have a more developed theory about what it means to individuals to be individuals. I like the idea of the tension between individuality and representativeness. But in terms of your question is what is possible, I haven't bumped up against those limits yet. Okay, so I'm willing to take the implementation, the theorizing and implementation as far as it can go.
The relationship between individuality and representativeness, there is from the theological perspective as well, it's not just theological, but there's a rather wonderful essay in a book actually published by Nils, edited by Nils in 2000, a result of ESSET, I think, by Michael Velker, who talks about the meaning of the person, the modern person, the tension between the person behind the mask and in front of the mask, which I take to be about really the tension between representativeness and individuality. It's a really remarkable essay. David Kelsey makes not as much as he could out of it in his book Eccentric Existence, but really sort of recognizes the importance of the tension, and it's a fascinating subject. I can strongly recommend Michael Velker's essay on it. It's really excellent.
Thank you.
I have another.
May I ask a question?
Oh, go ahead.
So I wonder if this would be possible. There's a lot of discussion in how values or moral priorities might change in harsh versus non-harsh environments. So for example, right now we're faced with all kinds of harsh environments, but originally, you know, there'd be times of drought, or maybe people that lived in more harsh climates and things. I wonder if it's possible in this space, because I see the clusters moving about in the space. Would it be possible to have like half the space be a harsh environment and the other part of the space be a non-harsh environment, and then see how the clusters might change as it goes through the space?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things on my list to do. And I was thinking of sometime last year, I was thinking of putting what corners in. So each corner of the floor would be a different kind of environment where certain activities would be privileged. So there's one which is where you get a lot of energy just by being there, for example, or other ones, very stressy corners, and seeing how that would change things. And yeah, I like the idea of having sort of sub-environments. Also, there's nothing about food in this, and you know, they have to eat. Well, you know, I haven't simulated anything about food and hunger and lack of resources or anything like that. Basically, this is a very benign environment. Everybody tries to make friends, and things generally improve when they become friends and offer care to one another. So yeah, I could implement those things that you say, but haven't done it yet.
Okay, I'd like to bring Philip in.
Yes, thanks. I mean, it's I find all of this stuff really interesting, but sometimes I have to stand back just a little bit from some of the details of the discussion, because it seems to me that what's really important about what William's done is he's found a route to tackling something that Leon has identified as a whole raft of problems that are discussed in 4E cognition, and all of the failures of donkey's years of cognitive modeling to be able to sort of, in some sense, get to the heart of the matter and deal with some of the integrative issues. And a core element of that is that psychology models, particularly those that developed in laboratory cognitive psychology in the late 60s and 70s, were all looking for a small number of parameters to account for behaviors in very, very small-minded tasks that were performed in a laboratory, typically that involved repetition of the same problem over and over again, so you could get means and averages. And it's been clear for some time from the challenges from that we need modeling techniques that will enable us to get into high parameter spaces. And this is what computer science has done very well in the past, that they've acknowledged that with knowledge representation and dealing with that, you need a lot of parameters. So what I think William's done here rather elegantly is to come up with a way that is grounded in a set of arguments, but enable him to manage a high parameter space. So it's an exploratory device, and we can all find faults with it and bits that it doesn't do, but I think it's important to acknowledge why this kind of thing is important, because it's providing one of many possible routes into how it is that you get all of that stuff into a modeling mix that enables you to take issues about relationality forward. I think there are other ways of doing it, but the important thing, if you want computationally explicit models, is to have methods for managing it. So I think there's a method thing here, and then there's a reality thing about whether or not it's doing what I would like him to be doing, or whether what Leon would like him to be doing. The fact is, he's doing something abstract that is important, and which will give us a way of discussing how it is that that kind of endeavor should be constrained. So I'd like to see it constrained by probably a different set of criteria than everybody else here, because I'm interested in meaning systems and other stuff. So I might do it in a different way, but it does seem to me that we should bring out what's really important about it and actually make that explicit, so people don't just criticize it because it's not doing this and saying, well, if it's tackling this important problem, how could we refine that, or what kind of alternative methods would it perhaps inform one area better than another?
I totally agree, Philip. I actually think it's quite an extraordinary tool for understanding all kinds of social and relational processes. The conference we discussed things that we'd like to see William do in the future, given an infinite amount of time and money and powerful computers. And I mean, it was mind-blowing, the things that could be included, which I mean, you know, really has the potential to lead to really important experimental work on what holds entire societies together, and religions and all kinds of other groups of people, and the roles of different individuals and different rules within those communities. I mean, I mean, really potentially completely extraordinary. I think it's a wonderful thing.
Well, I don't need money. I've got an incredibly powerful computer at home, and so it's just time. Just need time.
Okay, Niels.
Thank you very much. I think it's a wonderful model to see it, and also to see how you, William, are putting in new parameters and evaluating how you can do it. And I think that the suggestion from Catherine Johnson that we have some different environments is very important as well. I thought about one thing. It is about the thing that you just had on one of your slides below, that you also will try to model the kind of the blood is thicker than water. And I thought about that maybe a methodological problem is that in a sense you and everybody else are modeling, so to say, adult singletons, individuals, and of course you're making the individual level. It is an individual based modeling system. I'm aware of that, but could it be that we think about also that we also have actually children who are raised in specific, so you don't start out as a lonely person, you actually are embedded in some strong bonds of affinity and affection and intimacy, and then you move out in the world from there. So is it possible somehow to make not the starting picture, the individual singleton, but also try to model some of the emerging individuals in such a model?
Yeah, I totally get that, and it's on my list of things to do. Actually, from the very beginning, I wanted to have agents who would essentially give birth, if you like, to other agents who would share some of the characteristics that they had, and there would be some ready-made, if you like, kinship bonds, which would be expressed through the affection, through the dispositions of those new agents. But they would also know that they were related, and that because that has some impression as well. And I'd like to mention a paper that Catherine wrote with others a few years ago on how kinship relations can be quite informative about in this case it had to do with attribution. Sorry, it's right in front of me.
The perception of personhood.
Yeah, on the perception of personhood, that's it. Yeah. And so I that seeing that paper a couple of weeks ago reminded me that I need to get to this, to the kinship ideas. But yeah, definitely want to implement that.
We're towards the end of our time. We've had a great discussion, but there is more time if we need it. Anyone else want to come in?
I have one other comment on importance and degree, which impressed me a lot. And I'm wondering how you are, if at all, attending to the relationship between those two? Are they zero correlated with one another, or are you correlating them to some degree? Because although there is there is often a gap between importance and action, it isn't a zero. Perhaps your starting point could be some degree of correlation between the two, and build in a more realistic representation of at least human reality there. If you made me give you a number, I would have a hard time, but I could give it some thought.
Well, the neat thing about distributions is you don't have to give a number. You can just say it's somewhere in this distribution. No, that's right. So to answer your question directly, I have, when I generate initially the initial values for the importance, degree, and intensity, or if you like, the quantity of report, decision, and action, respectively. They're totally uncorrelated. They're just new random numbers every time. But I accept that, yeah, there is a correlation between them. People, by and large, do as they say, as they report they'll do. They don't always. And there might be reasons why, for most of the time, they do as they say, but or decide as they say, but other reasons why they'll act differently. Yeah, I kind of also stress that I haven't yet made this as a kind of a veridical model of the human condition. But I hope there's enough in the software, enough play in the software, if you like, that once we know more about what the empirical facts are, that I could put it in and it would be slightly more accurate. But at the moment, I'm not looking for accuracy with human populations. I'm just trying to get the model to work. But yeah, I take the point absolutely that there has to be some correlation between what people say they do and what they actually decide to do, and how motive they are to do it, the action. There is correlation there, but it may vary a lot between individuals as well.
Yeah, it does.
Mm-hmm. I mean, along those lines, I mean, if it's okay, I don't mean to distract from any other sort of novel lines of questioning and return to my favorite "what can William do" sort of approach, but misunderstanding. The idea that I mean, the number of let's be honest, quite dreadful television programs and films I see where the core relational narratives are driven almost entirely by misunderstanding.
Yes, it's wonderful.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Jane Austen is very good at that. You know,
yes,
letters that go missing, or you know, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, without misunderstanding, quite often there is no plot at all. But these are all interesting explorations of what happens when people misinterpret action, or mishear or overhear something and misinterpret it, and you don't need much of it to completely destroy entire communities. And I think that's treating everybody as sort of rational actors in an economic sense is fascinating if you want to understand the interaction between particular underlying variables. But the total chaos of human life specifically, but probably other kinds of social animals as well. I mean, I don't know whether the Hymenoptera misunderstand each other and get confused and fall out with each other and sort of fail to build communities. But the impact of misunderstanding, I think, would be a wonderful thing to model.
Yeah, twice a day I encounter dogs. I mean, I walk my dog and we encounter other dogs by other keepers on the thing. And actually, you know, it's really interesting to see how a dog will want to play, and another dog who might be younger doesn't really kind of understand that, and or might be worried about it. It's fascinating. But yeah, that's another example of something that can in principle be built in, but I haven't looked at it yet. Oh, sorry. And but the more significant point I wanted to make about that had to do with the what if scenarios. So, you know, what if there's a person who deliberately misunderstands or always says yes when they mean no, or that type of thing, you know, because some of the mechanism for that is already in the simulation program, and yeah, I could make use of it to model these what if scenarios.
Yes, you could insert sort of deliberately deviant individuals, couldn't you? Who's
and it's not difficult to do that, actually.
Yeah, I'd love to see how that works out.
The only thing I did just as a quick experiment on tampering with the random initialization was to have a few super people who were, you know, 100% good, you know, in every aspect, and just to see what would happen. And, you know, I didn't take that very far because there are more pressing things to be getting on with. But yeah, I can create, if you like, combinations of value quantities that reflect certain, if you like, characters. But again, I stress it's not a simulation of a human.
No. But just in terms of practical limitations, what is the largest number of agents you could model in a particular simulation?
So the computer I've got is like got 96 cores, and I can, you know, which is more powerful than computers were when I was a student. You know, I mean, it's just amazing. But you know, there's more memory in my computer at home than there was in the whole world when I was a student. So, you know, it's extraordinary. So I've had, say, thousands of agents on here. It's hard to see them on the screen, so I don't do. For the purpose of demonstration, I restricted about between 30 and 50. There are 41 today.
Right.
So, you know, it could be thousands.
I wonder whether the results are different just because of numbers, whether the patterns.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. Yeah, I'd have to change the display because I like looking at what's going on, and I wouldn't be able necessarily to look at 1,000 or more. I would be able to tell from the overall population graphs, you know, the plots of the economies overall. That could tell you something. Could tell you if they've all died or something, you know.
If there aren't any other comments, I've been thinking about the scope or boundary conditions of this model, and for example, whether it could model a relationship between God and a human. And I think it probably couldn't, because I think it's a feature of the model, even though you can have super people, I think they're all agents of basically the same kind. I think the theological assumption about God is that he's not one agent in a series of agents. So I think you couldn't sort of put him in the model as having special properties, but an agent of the same kind as the others. So I think it couldn't model the relationship between God and a human. But then I wondered whether it could model a relationship between God and a pet dog. Not sure about that. Perhaps not for the same reason that they would be different kinds of agents. These seem to be sort of reciprocal agents of the same kind.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But there's nothing preventing me from creating the right software to implement other kinds of agents. I've already got the sun, which is a different kind of agent. It goes across, it gives out energy, you can't make friends with it, etc., etc. But so yeah, all I need is a model to work from of what this God is. Maybe you can supply that, given authoritative representation, and I'll simulate it.
Warm thanks to William. It's clearly a very fine technical achievement, and it raises fascinating issues as we've as has become apparent in the discussion we've had in the last hour or so. So thank you very much indeed. And
thank you, Fraser, for organizing it, and thank you everybody for participating. I really valued your participation, and it's just set off so many more ideas to pursue.
And this is the third of this series of 4 Zoom sessions. We have one more on Monday when Philip is presenting on paying attention to spiritual meanings and modeling spiritual practices using his cognitive architecture, interacting cognitive subsystems. And for those in the UK, I think this is at between 2 and 4 on Monday afternoon, and others can extrapolate from that. So look forward to that, the last of these Zoom sessions. But thank you again, and thank you to everyone for being here. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. The next episode of this ISSR 4-part series will be released by the end of October 2023. So please watch out for that to release on major podcast services and the YouTube channel here. If you enjoyed what you have seen and or heard here today, please consider clicking that like button and subscribing. And let us know what discussions you would like next in the comment section below. We have many more discussions available, so be sure to check that out on our channel here or on our podcast. And for more discussions and more content related to the academic field of science and religion, please visit us on our website, which will be in the detail box below. Bye for now, and see you at the next ISSR in Conversation.